1, just to kind of give us a start to the story. I'll start us off, and then we'll get going. Now it came to pass after these things. So, what things have gone by? If you've studied Genesis, we're in Genesis 22. What has happened up to this point? Can you just name a few things? Abraham
left his home.
He had a little incident with King Abimelech.
Yep, Abimelech. That's good. Yes, he kind of failed there with Abimelech and his wife. He has another son, right? Who's this? Ishmael. And he's had, up to this point, another son, Isaac. Welcome. Come on in. Good to see you. Welcome. So he's got Isaac. Now, is Abraham old or young at this point? Pretty old. Some people think he's maybe about 100. Right here. But is Ishmael still living with them? No. Ishmael has left. Hagar has left. So it's just Isaac at home. And so that's kind of all these things, or some of these things. Now it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. So here we're going to go through the test. And I wanted to kind of go back through to read another verse. So I want to read Genesis 21, 1 and 2. This will reinforce this. What do you want me to hear? Oh. Okay. Streaming, so I guess they want me to wear this. All right. That's all right. Someone want to read that? Genesis 21, 1 through 2.
And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And the Lord said unto Sarah, for Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the sixth time of which God had spoken to him.
Right. So God followed through with his promise, didn't he? You remember that God had promised Abraham that through welcome. Come on in. Morning. Abraham through Sarah would have a son, and he was old. She was old. He was old. Do you remember? Sarah kind of thought that was a joke, right? So what did she do? She laughed. Inside. Well, God could see inside, and he said, "Why are you laughing?" And actually they named him Isaac, which means laughter, right? So God fulfilled his promise. In their old age, Abraham and Sarah had a son named Isaac. So that's kind of the context of Genesis 22. All right. Let's go to James 1:13. Now, just remember, what did God do in Genesis 22, verse 1? What did he say? God was going to what, Abraham? Test him. Right? So that kind of may lead us to some questions. Go to James 1:13. Does that mean that God tempts us? What does it say in James 1:13? When someone finds that, why don't you read it?
Let no one say, when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone.
Okay.
Is there a qualifier in there? Because I see that word by evil in there.
Why don't you go read 12 and 13 too? I meant to say that. I forgot.
Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. So let no one say when he is tempted, I am tempted by God. So in other words, it sounds like he's saying to be tempted by evil. Maybe I'm going where you're not planning on going, but when it talks about the temptation of Christ, it says that the Holy Spirit led Jesus out of the wilderness to be tempted. Are we talking about two different types of temptation here? Or are we saying that God is able, he doesn't tempt by waving evil in front of people's eyes. He tests them by bringing them through a straight place. I mean, is there...
Yeah, I think you're on the right.
I
get what
and
you're
I don't
saying.
know if that's kind of what James is saying here. I don't know.
But maybe go ahead.
Maybe
go ahead.
Sounds like to me, because I've been looking into that phrase in a long time. Temptation and test, they seem to be the same, but they're different. It's like the differential between stupid and ignorance. Stupid, you just don't know. I mean, when you're ignorant, you don't know. Stupid, you know, but you do it anyway. You know. So, but then also, there's that seasoning thrown on it, which is what the devil does. And so the test no longer is a test, but it's temptation, because now there's an ulterior motive behind the test. Yeah, take this, but he's trying to trick you.
Right.
Tested by temptation.
Right.
Exactly.
Something is coming.
Tested by temptation.
Tested by temptation. That's
well, you have to go back to the garden, Genesis chapter 3.
right.
The tree was there as a test. It was the most simple test that God could have given to the loyalty of his children. And, maybe it wasn't such a bad thing when we had that Sabbath school class a couple weeks ago when somebody said we're all stupid. Because sin is stupid and we're all stupid. I'm sorry, no, I was just going over. But, so, help us out with that a little bit, Mike.
So if maybe we could explain it. If whatever tempts you that you know is totally wrong. Did God make the wrong?
No.
Did he create the wrong? But it tempts us, right? I think he's saying God didn't create the wrong. But we're tempted by it.
Could it be kind of like the children of Israel? Okay, so we'll go back to this. When the temptation was constantly around them in the wilderness, but yet God protected them, and then when they complained and he withdrew the protection, the temptation was so overwhelming they could not, they couldn't resist. They did not resist. They had not been, I don't know, is there a kind of a veil that we sometimes miss when God does some protection? And that's why Satan and God had to have that dialogue. Well, you put a hedge about him. Let him be exposed to my full wrath. And so, I don't know. Does that have something to do with that too?
Right. Well, let's move on.
Maybe we can.
Let's go to 1 Peter.
This may help us.
1:7.
1:7.
I keep moving here.
So in James,
Go ahead.
where we were reading,
Yep.
it says, every man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust.
Right.
So it's not God he might put us within that area, but it's our own lust that actually takes us all the way.
God didn't put that there in our heart. Let's read verses 6 and 7. 1 Peter 6 and 7. So we're talking about Genesis 22, verse 1. God tested Abraham. So we're trying to answer the question, why did he do that? Or why was that necessary? And we put it in the context of our own life. Because we are tested. We go through trials. What's the point of that? Why do we have difficulty? Why do we have disturbances? 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7. Someone want to read that?
This you greatly rejoice. Now for a little while you have been grieved by various trials. The genuineness of your faith being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ.
All right. So
that's the reason for the test and temptation.
Right. So what's the word there? The word there that's being of your faith. So it's a faith building exercise, right? Our faith in God is going to be tested. So that we may be
so that we
to
may be
praise,
to
honor, and
praise,
glory
honor, and glory
when Jesus comes.
when Jesus comes.
So it's a faith.
So it's a
they're
faith.
testing
They're
Abraham's
testing
faith,
Abraham's
right?
faith,
And
right? And our
faith when
our
we go through
faith when we go
trials
through trials
is being what?
is being what?
Tested.
Tested.
All right, let's go to
All right, let's go to verse
2,
Genesis 22. Hopefully you mark that because that's where we're going to be going through.
Genesis
22, verse 2.
Someone want to read
Someone
that?
want to read that?
Then he said, take now your son, my son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you.
Okay, so here we go. Here's the test.
Here's the test.
And it's a tough one.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
Take your own.
Now
let's just go through this.
Let's just go through this.
Did he just say go
Did he
take
just
Isaac
say go take Isaac and
sacrifice him?
sacrifice him? Did he just kind of say that real quick like?
Notice.
Take your only son.
Right.
Right.
Not only is it your
Not
only
only
son,
is it your only son whom you
love,
and
go and do this.
So
you know, there's no mention of
there's
Ishmael.
no mention of
Ishmael.
Ishmael. He's out of the picture.
Your only son you have left.
Son you have left.
And he's reminding him,
you love him. You know, God doesn't try to sugarcoat it or pass some kind of part of his brain. He's just reminding him, your only son, your one you love. Right. Okay. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Let's look, just hold your finger there. Let's go to Luke 14:26. What kind of a trial is this? This is not going to answer the total question, but maybe it brings up more questions in your mind. Someone want to read that? Luke 14:26. Wow, that's pretty tough, isn't it? That's pretty tough. What do you suppose that means? Have you ever studied that? Right? Right. Yeah, this got translated with the word hate, and I think the old King James does too. And it's not a real good translation. The actual word, the definition of the word, the Greek word hate there is, if anyone comes to me and does not love less, right? Love these, your father, your mother, sons, daughters, less than me, you cannot be my disciple. So this was the test for Abraham. Do you love your son? He already said he did. We know he loves him. But do you love me more than your, what? Your son, right? That's a tough one, isn't it? Right.
Quick question on that. So are you saying God loved us more than his son when he sacrificed his son on our behalf?
Right, and I think we got a verse coming up that's going to...
I'm just throwing that out there because that sounds kind of funny, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Is it more than or just indifferent? I'm sorry, I'm going somewhere where you're not.
Right. We'll kind of answer that later. No, that's a good question. You know, I think God's love is so, we can't quite wrap around it sometimes. But would that be a test for you? Would that be a tough test for you? Do you love your son or your daughter, or whoever it is, mother, father, more than me? And think about Abraham. He's waited, he's 100 years old. He's waited a long time. This probably isn't going to happen again, especially with Sarah. So that's a tough one.
And where did he take, let's go back to Genesis 22. Where is he going to take him? The land of Moriah. We don't have to go there, but in 2 Chronicles 3, verse 1, it said that Mount Moriah was in Jerusalem. And when David was looking for a spot for the temple, God told him, right here, I want this mountain right here. And he said, go by it. And he went and by it, and that was Mount Moriah. So it's where they built the temple. So that's the very spot where Isaac was to be sacrificed, is right where the temple would be someday in Jerusalem.
It's kind of interesting because there was more than one test there. Wasn't that also the location where David was tested through the prophet when he made an error of numbering the people of Israel?
Yep.
And he says you can have three choices. And he picked the one, but he went up to the threshing floor of Arana, which is, I believe, the location
Yep.
of Mount Moriah. And so I thought that's very interesting that it's a location of testing.
Right.
And
Yeah, very good. So, all right. So this is the test. So the question I asked again, I'll ask again. Do I love my house? I'm going to add other things to it. Material things. My things. My life. And then you can add your children, husband, spouse, more than God. Is there any, and that's why he tests us. Do you love these things more than me? Okay? So I put here, this was the what was going through Abraham's mind, possibly. Fact. Isaac was the what? He's the future, right? Everything that, I brought you out of Babylon and Ur of the Chaldees, and I brought you here, and this is going to be your land. And Isaac was the future. That's a fact. And God said, go sacrifice the future. Right? And does he ever seem like he's doing that to you? Go sacrifice your future. Right? Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right, let's go on. Does this make sense to us? Here's my future. This is what God had even said it. This is your future. Okay, go sacrifice the future. Does that make any sense humanly speaking? Not really, right? Not really. Doesn't make sense as far as we can see, or our human logic, right? What is it called when we obey God when it doesn't make sense to us? Right. That's right. That's right. When we obey God, it doesn't make sense. The future's gone. They're sacrificed. That's what faith is, right? And we learned in the beginning that God tests us to build our what? Faith, right? Okay. So why testing and trials? Would I be faithful if I lost and you just fill in the blanks, job, health, family? The true answer is I don't know, right? I'm not really sure. Until it happens, right? So just food for thought for all of us. Right. Right. Until it got to the garden and the cross, he couldn't see past that, could he? He couldn't see that was going to work out. Yeah. All right, verse 3. Someone want to read that?
So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took two of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. He split the wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him.
All right, so can you imagine the next day, or maybe this was that night, he gets up early, and what does he do? right? He prepares. He gets the donkey, and looks like he was out there with the servants splitting wood. Can you imagine? They didn't have a lot of wood out there, so that's probably why he had to start early. You got to get all this wood together. You got to get the knife together. And what else did he bring? The fire, right? I don't know what that was in. Maybe it was in a pot. But we'll think of that in the future. They actually had to bring the fire, and it had to last how many days? 3 days. So it was probably not a match or a lighter, right? He probably had a pot of coals or whatever. Gathered all this together, and he is going. He's going to be obedient. Now, why was Abraham obedient? Was he morally good-natured? Here's another question. This is maybe a tricky question. Right. Pretty bad ones. Right. That's why it's a tricky. Because, yes, he was listening to God, but then he lied. He took his servant and married her and had a struggle there in the home. So you can't say he was totally morally good-natured, right? So that wasn't just because he wasn't obedient just because. You get some kids and they do everything you say and they're so good, but then you get the other ones, it's like total opposite. It wasn't like Abraham was just totally obedient all the time. I guess that's my point, right? So I'm just going to go along with what God said like a robot. He wasn't a robot. He made mistakes. But he had what? He had faith. He had faith. And so he made mistakes, but he had faith.
You might say he had a living faith because what he believed he lived most of the time.
Right. Yeah. People knew who he was.
Would that be encouraging to us as well? Because what's going to happen when we do fail in temptation and we come to another test, and what's going to be flashed before our eyes all the time? All the other times where we have failed, and this is where the real testing comes. That's why we keep often getting brought over the same ground again and again.
Right.
Until we get it. But that's the thing. We've got to have that. It shouldn't be discouraging. It should be encouraging that we're, man, why in the world did I was just here. Why am I here again? And it's like, well, because God still loves you and he wants to get you over this hump.
Right.
And that's why the word is so precious, because we remember it. To hear that still small voice and read his word, and that lifts you up from the guilt and condemnation.
Because look, Abraham could have said, I can't believe I'm doing this. What's going on? God's really, maybe he's going to forget me and go on to another. There's all kinds of things he could have been thinking because of his shortfalls. But you have up there, he had faith and believed that God would do his best.
It brought something to my mind what he said. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, what was their main issue? If they had a problem with sin or conflict, what was it about? I'll be a little bit less specific. A little bit less specific. I would say family.
He got scared. He said, "No, that's not my wife."
I could use the same excuse.
I was going to be a little less specific and say family. Family, because their children had problems too, right? So Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had problems with their family. They weren't breaking the Sabbath and all this. They had family problems, right? Family issues. And so you see here as a test to do with what? Their family, right? But he had faith, and he believed, you see that God knew best. Not Mike knows best, not whatever I know best, but God knows best. It doesn't make sense, but God knows best, okay? And we're going to go with that because that's what faith is about. God knew best, not Abraham. All right, verse 4. Someone want to read that?
Then
right. So 3 days. Would it have been easier maybe like when you pull your tooth out, you got a tooth, I don't know if I've heard some parents just rip their kids' tooth out, but what would be better, to pull it out quickly or to pull it out for 3 days? Yeah, get it over with, right? But he's got to walk with Isaac. Some people think Isaac was about 25 years old, 30. For 3 days, he's got to think about this. He can't tell Isaac. The servants don't know. He's internalizing all of this. That's a rough trip, isn't it?
It's kind of like having surgery. You have to wait for a week or two or whatever.
Yeah, it's
a long wait.
Long wait.
You want to get it done and over with, but once you've had it, you wish you hadn't. So, which is better.
So when we have trials, there's a duration, isn't there? But is there a positive in that? Let's read this verse in Revelation 2:10. And there actually is a positive that we can take out of this time of trial. There's always a period of trial. Revelation 2 verse 10 kind of hints us at what it might be. Someone want to read that when they find it. This is talking about the persecuted church, Smyrna, which was the persecuted church in the early centuries of Christianity. So he said, you're going to be in prison, you're going to be tested, you're going to have tribulations, you're going to have trials. How long are they going to be? 10 days. And then, prophetically speaking, that was, for that time period, 10 years. But what hope can we take from that and Abraham's experience? Trials and tribulations always have a time period. They will not go on forever. Right? There's going to be an end to your trial, right? God's not going to let you be a plaything for the devil or anyone else forever. There's always a time period for God's testing and tribulations. Right. Sometimes it is this life. Sometimes it's 3 days, sometimes it's 10 days, sometimes it's 10 years. But there's always an end to the trial, and it's not going to be forever. So that I think is a little message of hope in Abraham's story. And the Bible teaches that there's always this time period. And then we come through that, as we read in Peter, 1 Peter, we just come forth like what? Gold, right? All right, verse 5. I'll read that. 22. And Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey, the lad, and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you. What did you notice there? I put it on the screen already, but what did he say? He didn't say, I'll come back. He said, we will return. Isn't that kind of cool? He still had faith that somehow, he didn't know how, we will return. Let's read what he actually was thinking in Hebrews 11. We're going around. Hebrews 11 is the hall of faith. What was Abraham thinking there? Someone want to read that when they find it. Hebrews 11, 17 through 19.
Well, see, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him. figurative sense.
Okay, so what was Abraham thinking? One of the thoughts that was running through his mind. I'm going to sacrifice him, but God can do what? Raise him up, right? Now, I don't know exactly how he's going to do that because he also had what in his other hand? The fire. So it was going to be a burnt sacrifice. So it wasn't going to be, I scratch you and you get, it was going to be a full sacrifice, and God was going to still be able to. So not only did Abraham walk faith, he walked 3 days, but he talked faith too, didn't he? We will what? Return. We will return. He talked faith. He walked faith.
Was there any, I don't think there was any incident of someone being raised from the dead.
I had that in my notes. I forgot it. That is exactly right. And maybe there is, and I didn't notice it. But from this point to Abraham in the Bible, nobody had been raised from the dead yet. So this was pretty unprecedented. That's really good. Right? You go forward in time, even there's a couple in the Old Testament who were raised. There's a soldier that fell into the bones of Elisha. There was Moses, yeah. Kid who got sick, yep. But up to this point, it was unprecedented, and so that took a lot of faith. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he had evidence that God was working.
I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor, but last week's lesson, or was it earlier in this week's lesson? Must have been last week's lesson, where it talks about how God calls us to do something sometimes that He never intends for us to finish, because in the process of beginning, there is the lesson to be learned. There's some things that He has us do that we may not actually ever finish. And so maybe, I don't know, I just thought about that when you said up to this point nobody had ever been raised from the dead. Whatever was going to be the result, Abraham had to have faith that even if he was to die, there was some practical lesson in there for us. What's that? God may ask us to do something He never intends for us to complete. He may ask us to go somewhere He never intends for us to arrive at. That's the 24th. That's Sunday. Okay. So, it was this week. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That God sometimes brings something into our life that the test is in making the decision, not necessarily what happens on
Oh, yeah, for sure. That's what's any work we do, right? The hard part is getting off the couch and starting. The work's really not that bad, It's getting up and actually starting. That's sometimes, I don't know if that's with you, but that's with me.
I think it's an important point to just highlight too, just kind of what you guys touched on as far as, no one had ever experienced something like this before, is that Abraham knew God's voice. He knew it. There was no doubt in his mind, like, am I really, hearing this correctly? He's asking me to do something that's actually biblically against the 10 Commandments, he's asking me to break his own laws. And yet he knew his voice so clearly that he responded in obedience.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't make sense to him. It was against what God had laid out for them to do, as far as commandments. I know that, it's written later on, in Exodus, but they knew what the commandments were. God had shared that with them throughout the ages. And Abraham knew his voice.
Right. Very good. Yeah, because if, a strange voice is telling you to do that, not going to happen. All right, verse 6. So Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. He took the fire in his hand, a knife. So Abraham carries the fire. Can you just imagine this? Got the pot of fire in this hand, the knife in this hand. Isaac's got the big pile of wood. It was on the donkey. Can you imagine? He didn't carry that for 3 days. It was big enough that it needed a donkey. He puts it on. And this kind of leads us to believe that Isaac was pretty strong, he wasn't like 15. He was probably, or less. He was stronger than Abraham, which leads you to, to the fact that Isaac had to display some faith too, because he could have just ran off. His dad's 100. He's 25. He didn't have to get tied down there. All right, 7 through 11. We'll just kind of go through the rest of the story. But Isaac spoke to Abraham his father and said, "My father," he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Look, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering?" And Abraham said, "My son, God will provide for himself a lamb." Okay? For a burnt offering. So the two of them went together, and when they had come to a place which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and placed the wood in order, and he bound his son. He actually tied him up, laid him on that altar, on the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." So that's a tough thing, wasn't it? That's just totally amazing. Welcome. Good to see you.
He said that God will provide the lamb,
Right.
but we're going to tie you up and put you on the altar anyway.
So at some point he got the hint that he was the lamb, right? Oh. Let's go to James 1, 2-4. We're going back to James, see what we can learn. James 1, 2-4. Someone want to read that? We could have read this before. Any part of the story we could have read this.
My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing.
All right, so there's just a little more emphasis on why we go through trials and what to do in trials. Can you think of anyone in the Bible that was going through a pretty bad trial and they exemplified joy? Actually sang. I can think of one that Paul and Silas at midnight, the deepest, darkest time of night. Oh, let's just sing. Right. Right. Would it be hard for Abraham and Isaac in that trial on the top of that mountain to be joyful? Well, maybe we don't know what joy is. Maybe it would have been hard for them to be happy. God doesn't necessarily promise happiness in every part of our life, right? But he does say you can have joy. There's a difference.
You quoted from 1 Peter before. 1 Peter 4:12 talks about that. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you. But rejoice to the extent that you are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you will also be glad with the same joy.
Right.
So that's really, I think, ultimately, God was showing Abraham the ultimate joy that was to come to the earth through this semblance of the sacrifice and his son.
Right.
This is the ultimate joy that's going to come to the earth. So don't think this is strange.
Right.
Anyways, I just thought that was kind of interesting.
There's a theme there. Joy. Joy in the trial. Glory, joy. It's kind of a theme. All right, back to 22, verse 12. And he said, the angel of the Lord, he said, "Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Right? You've not withheld your only son from me. Let's go to Romans 8:32 I have here, the next one. We're just wrapping this up. Romans 8:32. Oops. Someone want to read that when they get there.
He that spared not his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with us? How shall he not with him also freely give us all things?
This kind of, I don't know if it perfectly answers your question from the beginning, Steve. God didn't ask Abraham to do anything that he wasn't willing to do, did he? You know, where were you in my hard times, God? Where were you when this happened and this person died? Well, I was in the same spot when my son died. That's where I was, right? So he didn't do anything. He did not spare his own son. He spared Abraham's son, Isaac, but didn't spare his own son. And then 13, we'll just finish this story here. We're just about out of time. God provides a lamb, right? Then Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and there behind him was a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. So Abraham took the ram, and offered it up for a burnt offering instead of his son. And then 14, God called the name of the place, the Lord will provide. As it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
His city, his holy city established, Temple Mount.
Yeah. Good. I just have a few, when I skip that verse. So severe testings, and maybe you're going through a severe testing, maybe you have gone through, maybe you will go through. I think we all have those. But they what? They test and prove your what? Faith, right? And they make it even stronger, right? That we've learned. Not only do they test and prove your faith, but they prove whose faithfulness? God's faithfulness, right? Right? He's going to come through every time. That proves his faithfulness. So what is faith? According to the story, it's not imagining what God's will is. Do we ever do that? We imagine. What's the problem when you try to imagine what God's will is? Right? We limit him, right? Yeah, based on our own imaginings, right? Our imagination, that's where we get into trouble there. So faith is not imagining what God's will is. It is a response to divine revelation, right? God came, spoke to Abraham, and we didn't cover this, but if you ever study the story, 3 times he said, "Here am I." In the very first part of the story, God said, "Abraham," he said, "Here am I." In the middle of the story, Isaac comes to him, he asks him a question. He said, "Dad, here am I." At the end, when God spoke to him, Abraham is about to, "Here am I." That's all his response every time, "Here am I." So it's a response to divine revelation and God's word, right? That's what faith is. Faith holds nothing back, trusting God will provide, right? That's all I got. Any other thoughts on this story?
Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. Acknowledge him in all thy ways.
Right. Very good. So, just to kind of summarize, so we can bring home the story, God asked almost an impossible request of Abraham at the beginning of the story, where his whole future was going to be compromised. Abraham said, okay, goes through that experience, trial. There was a time period for the trial, 3 days. He's got to walk with Isaac. He comes through that and has that experience with God, travels all the way there, and just goes through that traumatic experience. And God speaks to him again, and God provided, right? God provided there on the mountain. And then he's got to walk back. Filled with praise, filled with hope, filled with joy. And think of the walk back, how they can talk that through. God is real. God became very real for Isaac at that point. Yeah. All right, well, time to end. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and watch care over us. Many times we go through things we cannot understand, we cannot explain, but we still have faith in you that you will provide, and in the end we will come out like gold tried in the fire. We thank you, dear Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.